The chamber of the Galactic Council was filled with light and arrogance. Every empire sat in its jeweled seat, their banners hanging high as if to remind lesser species of their power. At the center stood humanity's envoy, Ambassador Mara Quinn. She was calm, her dark uniform sharp, her posture steady, but her heart carried the weight of the screams she had heard through transmissions from the frontier. Those weren't statistics to her. They were families, farmers, children on colonies that had trusted the Council's promise of peace. The Dominion had broken that peace, burning entire worlds, taking prisoners, broadcasting their suffering across open channels. And now, those same killers stood outside the chamber doors, waiting to negotiate. "Ambassador Quinn," said the Chancellor, his voice oily and smug. "The Council requests that humanity cease its retaliations immediately. We must negotiate with the Dominion and end this bloodshed." Around him, alien delegates murmured in agreement, nodding with fake wisdom. The Vaughn delegate, scales glittering, added coldly, "You humans must learn restraint. Vengeance will only lead to extinction." Mara looked at him and saw the same tone she'd heard in her nightmares, the tone of those who watched genocide and called it balance. "Extinction," she repeated softly, "is what you allowed to happen to our people." The chamber filled with laughter. "We are not responsible for your failures," said the KRYTH representative, his voice a hiss. "Your colonies entered disputed territory." "Those were civilian worlds," Mara replied, her tone still calm, but her voice cut through the hall like a blade. "They were children, not soldiers." The council members exchanged glances, uninterested. To them, humanity was still a young, volatile species that needed guidance. "The Dominion has agreed to send representatives," said the Chancellor. "You will sit at the table and discuss terms. The alternative is continued destruction." Mara's jaw tightened. She had spent years learning to control her temper, but something inside her cracked as she remembered the images from Orion 4. The cities turned to glass, the school domes shattered, the evacuation ships shot down as they fled. "You call this destruction," she said quietly, "but it isn't war, it's slaughter." Her eyes rose to the Chancellor. "And you want us to make peace with those who did it?" "You are outnumbered," snapped the KRYTH. "You have no choice." At that, Mara finally smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was small, sharp, and dangerous. "You mistake us again," she said. "You think survival taught us submission. It taught us patience." The chamber murmured with confusion, but the Vaughn delegate sneered. "Patience will not save your species." "No," Mara replied, her eyes steady, "but memory will." She stepped closer to the center platform, her boots echoing on the marble floor. "We remember the screams you ignored. We remember every transmission you deleted from your archives. You didn't want justice, you wanted silence. And now you'll have it." "Ambassador Quinn." The Chancellor's voice rose. "You are ordered to stand down." Mara straightened. "We don't bargain with murderers." The words struck the hall like thunder. Delegates gasped, some shouting in outrage. The council floor erupted in noise, accusations, mockery, threats. "Arrogant human," shouted the Vaughn. "You think your defiance matters." "This will bring ruin," cried another. "You will doom your people." Mara said nothing. She waited for the noise to fade. When it finally did, her voice was calm again, almost quiet. "You believe power is the right to decide who lives and who dies. But you've forgotten what happens when those you step on stop asking for mercy." She turned, meeting the gaze of every delegate. "You want negotiations. We'll give you a message instead. Tell your Dominion masters that humanity accepts only one kind of peace, the kind written in their surrender." Security moved toward her, but none dared to touch her. They could see something in her eyes, something colder than hate, something older than war. She turned and walked toward the exit, her steps slow, deliberate, the sound echoing through the hall like a countdown. Behind her, the Chancellor tried to recover control. "Let it be known that Earth has defied the Council," he shouted. "They will face the consequences." But even he heard the tremor in his own voice. The chamber buzzed with whispers. Some called her insane. Others saw the fire in her calm and felt something they couldn't explain: fear. Outside the chamber, as the great doors closed behind her, Mara stopped for a moment and looked out across the shining spires of Sereth Prime. The city was beautiful, a symbol of the Council's pride. But beneath that beauty, she saw decay, empires fat on diplomacy, feeding off the blood of the innocent. She tapped her communicator. "This is Quinn. Transmission to Sol Command, priority black." A voice answered instantly. "Confirmed. Secure line open." Her tone changed, no longer diplomatic, but military, cold and efficient. Council negotiations terminated. Proceed with directive nightfall. There was a pause on the other end, then a low reply. Acknowledged. Nightfall is active. As she cut the channel, a faint wind moved across the platform, carrying the distant sound of thunder from the upper atmosphere. She didn't look back. Humanity had pleaded for justice and been denied. Now it would no longer ask. In the council hall, the Chancellor sat trembling as new reports arrived on his console. Human fleets were withdrawing from known space, cutting communication lines, vanishing from the map. The council aides murmured nervously. "They're isolating themselves," one said. "Perhaps it's a sign of surrender." The Chancellor stared at the screen, his hands cold. "Or preparation," he whispered. For the next few hours, the galaxy tried to convince itself that Earth's silence was weakness. The Council issued statements condemning the human defiance. The Dominion's media called it cowardice. But then, one by one, the border outposts that had attacked human colonies stopped transmitting. No debris was found, no distress calls, just silence. By nightfall, rumors spread. Ships were vanishing along the trade routes. Dominion commanders reported seeing shadows in the void, fleets that appeared without warning, struck with impossible precision, then disappeared before sensors could react. Back on Sereth Prime, a junior officer burst into the council chamber with trembling hands. "Message from the frontier," he stammered. "From Orion Sector." The Chancellor looked up. "Read it." The officer's voice shook as he spoke. Message reads, "We found them. They're not running. They are coming." The room went silent. No one spoke. The laughter, the mockery, the arrogance, all gone. For the first time, the Council realized that the meeting meant to tame humanity had unleashed something far worse. And somewhere in the black between the stars, humanity moved without a sound. They weren't coming to negotiate. They were coming to remind the galaxy why mercy, once denied, always returns, just not in the way anyone expects. That day in the Great Chamber, when Ambassador Mara Quinn spoke those 7 words, "We don't bargain with murderers," the galaxy thought it had witnessed defiance. In truth, it had just witnessed the beginning of its judgment. The council chamber's chaos had not yet faded when the first human colony burned. It happened within hours of Mara Quinn's refusal. The Dominion, angered by what they called Earth's insolence, unleashed its fleets without warning. Their warships descended on Halcyon 3, a small agricultural world with no defenses, no soldiers, just families. They came at dawn. The sky turned red as plasma fire scorched the ground. Children ran to the shelters that were never meant to hold against orbital bombardment. The last transmission received from the surface was a mother's voice screaming for help before static consumed the signal. When the smoke cleared, Halcyon 3 was gone. 50,000 dead. The Dominion broadcasted the attack live across the galactic network as a warning. This is what happens when you defy the Council's order for peace. On Sereth Prime, the Council held an emergency session. Delegates filled the chamber, their faces grim but their words hollow. "This is regrettable," said the Chancellor, his voice trembling but rehearsed. "But Earth must understand the consequences of defiance." He looked around the table, expecting nods of agreement. He got them, from every empire that valued trade more than truth. "We cannot afford to intervene," said the Vaughn delegate coldly. "The Dominion provides half the ore for this quadrant. Do you want another resource crisis?" The KRYTH representative hissed. "The humans provoked this. They invited destruction. Perhaps now they'll learn obedience. Not a single voice spoke for the dead. Not one. The council chose profit over principle, power over justice. But they didn't realize someone was listening. In a quiet corner of Seraph Prime, away from the grand halls and politics, Mara Quinn stood before a holographic display, her expression calm but her eyes burning with something far more dangerous than anger, resolve. She had received the report from Halcyon 3 personally. The Dominion had called it collateral damage. The Council had called it inevitable. Humanity called it murder. "So that's your piece," she whispered. Her aide, a young lieutenant, stepped closer. High Command is waiting for your signal." Mara didn't answer at first. She stared at the glowing image of Halcyon 3, now just a red mark on the screen. "Send the message," she said finally. "Activate Project Retribution." Across the Sol system, silent signals flickered through the void, invisible to all known detection grids. Deep beneath the oceans of Europa, ancient bunkers came alive. Hidden shipyards under the ice fields of Mars opened for the first time in a century. Massive warships, black, sleek, and unmarked, rose from the darkness. They had been built in secret, funded by paranoia and prophecy, waiting for the day the galaxy's hypocrisy would choke itself. That day had come. On Earth, the President addressed the Planetary Assembly in a closed session. The room was silent as she spoke. "They've slaughtered our people," she said, voice steady but heavy with grief. "The Council has abandoned us. The Dominion believes we will beg. But they forget who we are. Humanity has never begged. We endured famine, plague, and extinction. We built cities on dead worlds. We walked through fire and came out stronger. Now we will remind them that mercy is not weakness, it's choice. And today, that choice is gone." The Council watched from their distant world as human ships began to vanish from trade routes. Civilian traffic ceased. Diplomatic envoys stopped responding. For the first time in history, Earth went silent. No transmissions, no signals, only static. The Chancellor called an emergency communication to the human embassy, demanding an explanation. The automated system answered with only 4 words: "Transmission lines discontinued. Goodbye." The Council didn't understand the meaning. They thought humanity was retreating, preparing for surrender. They were wrong. Humanity wasn't running, it was preparing to strike. Meanwhile, the Dominion fleets grew bold. They moved deeper into human space, torching border colonies and broadcasting every strike. "See what happens when you refuse peace," one Dominion general said before detonating another city. They laughed at human resistance, calling it primitive. But they didn't see the trap closing. The first retaliation came quietly. A Dominion fleet of 12 ships vanished in the outer rim. Their last message was a garbled distress call, static and a single human word: retribution. At first, the Council dismissed it as rumor. Then more reports came in. Entire convoys missing. Dominion communication hubs offline. Navigation buoys hacked. No distress calls, no debris, just silence. "We're under attack," one Dominion officer managed to send before his signal cut off mid-sentence. The Council demanded explanations, but no one had any. Then, a week later, they received an untraceable broadcast. It played once across every major channel, translated automatically into every known language. It was a woman's voice, cold, calm, unmistakably human. "This is Ambassador Mara Quinn of the Terran Republic," she said. "You asked us to negotiate with murderers. You called it peace. You chose to watch as our children burned. Now, we will show you the cost of your mercy. We do not seek your approval. We do not seek your help. We seek only balance. And balance begins with silence." The message ended. The network crashed within seconds. On Seraph Prime, panic erupted. "We must condemn this," shouted the KRYTH. "They've gone rogue." The Chancellor tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. "Do you not see?" hissed the Vaughn delegate. "They're no longer acting like diplomats. They're acting like predators." Far from the Council's light, Human fleets moved in perfect silence. They called it Project Retribution, but within the black corridors of their warships, the soldiers called it something else, the Quiet War. They didn't announce their battles. They didn't broadcast victories. They simply erased. Every Dominion base they struck was left the same way, dark, cold, and silent. The Dominion's arrogance began to collapse. The fleets that had once bombed cities now turned in panic, trying to locate an enemy they couldn't see. They fired blindly into empty space, destroying their own ships. The Council tried to intervene diplomatically, but their envoys found only wreckage and the echo of human signals whispering through static. In the center of the void, aboard the Terran flagship Vigilant, Mara Quinn stood on the bridge, staring at the holographic map. Red dots, Dominion installations, blinked one by one, then vanished. "Status report," she said. Her tactical officer's voice was steady. 3 more fleets down. No survivors. Mara nodded slowly. "And the Council? They're begging for dialogue." She smiled faintly. "Then they've learned something. That's good." For a moment, she closed her eyes. The silence of space pressed against the hull like a living thing. She wasn't proud. She wasn't angry. She was resolved. The galaxy had forced humanity to remember what it had forgotten: how to fight without mercy, how to survive without permission. The Council still believed it could talk its way out of this. But humanity was done talking. The diplomats had become soldiers. The peacekeepers had become executioners. And somewhere, deep inside the void, an ancient truth whispered through the stars. You can only ignore the cries of the innocent for so long before the universe itself answers back. And this time, the voice that answered belonged to humanity. The galaxy was still trying to understand what had happened when the silence began spreading like a living shadow. Dominion fleets that once paraded through human space like conquerors suddenly went missing. Entire battle groups disappeared from radar, their final transmissions cut off mid-sentence. At first, the Council dismissed the reports as false. Then the evidence came in: wreckage drifting in the dark, ships with hulls peeled open like fruit, no survivors, no escape pods, no beacons. It was as if something had hunted them down in total silence. The Council demanded answers, but there were none. Humanity had vanished from all official maps, their worlds sealed, their channels dead. The Dominion screamed for vengeance, but it was already too late. The hunt had begun. In the void beyond the Orion Arm, there was no light, no communication, no law, only darkness. And in that darkness, the human fleets waited. They were unlike any navy the galaxy had ever seen. Their ships didn't shimmer with paint or glow with energy signatures. They absorbed light, blending with the void until even scanners failed to detect them. Their engines ran cold, their weapons hidden behind stealth panels that opened only when they struck. These were the Black Fleets, humanity's secret legacy, a weapon built not for glory but for survival. For decades, the Council had mocked Earth's obsession with secrecy and shadows, calling them paranoid relics of their primitive past. Now, those same shadows had come to life, moving through space like a living organism. On board the flagship HSS Revenant, Admiral Kane stood in the dim glow of the command deck. His voice was quiet, his posture composed. "Target grid coordinates confirmed?" he asked. His officer nodded. "Dominion convoy, 12 ships, escort formation. Civilian signatures none." Kane gave a single nod. "Engage the hunt." No alarms. No announcements. Just motion. In seconds, the fleet drifted into position, engines whispering in near silence. The Dominion ships didn't even know they were being watched. Their captains laughed, talking about how cowardly humans hid from real war. Then their lights flickered. For a moment, they thought it was a power fluctuation. Then came the first strike. It wasn't a barrage, it was precision. 3 rail slugs tore through the lead cruiser, slicing it clean in half. The second ship tried to turn, but a missile detonated against its drive core. The explosion consumed both vessels in an expanding fireball. By the time the Dominion commander shouted for shields, 6 more ships were already gone. Then the humans came out of the void. Sleek black ships glided past the dying convoy, their weapons glowing faintly blue. No battle cries, no words, just silence. Within 2 minutes, the entire convoy was erased. From the shadows of the wreckage, a faint signal pulsed, encrypted, human. It read only 2 words, justice served. Across the stars, it happened again. And again. Mining stations that had fueled Dominion warships went offline. Supply routes turned dark. Trade beacons blinked out. The Council's intelligence networks tried to investigate but found nothing but empty space. They're ghosts, one investigator whispered. They move like predators. They don't want to win, they want to end the hunt. The Council didn't understand what that meant, but the Dominion did. They remembered Earth's warning. We don't bargain with murderers. Weeks passed. Panic grew. Every Dominion war report said the same thing. No survivors, no trace, no mercy. Their admirals began refusing orders to enter human sectors, claiming their crews mutinied rather than face the Terrans. The Council condemned the fear as irrational, but even they started fortifying their borders. Their ships patrolled the edges of human space but dared not enter. They claimed neutrality, but in truth, they were terrified. Back on Seraph Prime, the Chancellor's sleepless nights grew longer. Every report ended the same way: unknown attackers, human signatures, no communication. They must be stopped, he muttered to himself. They'll destroy the balance. But the truth was crueler than he wanted to admit. The balance had already been destroyed. The Council had allowed monsters to slaughter innocents, and now the same predators they'd unleashed had turned on their creators. In the shadow of Europa's frozen seas, a hidden human command center pulsed with quiet activity. Admiral Rowan stood before a holographic map filled with red markers, each representing a Dominion outpost. Phase 2 complete, said her aide. 200 installations neutralized. Rowan's expression didn't change. And casualties? None on our side. No Dominion survivors. Rowan nodded. Good. Send the next coordinates. Leave their communication hubs intact. Her aide hesitated. Why leave them, Admiral? Rowan turned to her, eyes cold. Because fear spreads faster than bullets. And it did. Across the galaxy, rumors spread like infection. Dominion crews spoke of human ships that appeared from nothing, attacked with impossible precision, and vanished before anyone could respond. Some claimed the humans were using invisible drones. Others swore their fleets were controlled by AI ghosts. The Dominion Senate dismissed the stories as hysteria, but their fleets were shrinking faster than they could replace them. On one captured Dominion world, the truth became clear. When a Terran strike team landed, they didn't attack civilians, they rescued them. The Dominion had enslaved species from across the galaxy, using them as forced labor. The humans freed them all, giving them food and medicine, then vanished before the Council's observers arrived. The freed aliens told the same story. They didn't speak. They didn't boast. They just came, freed us, and left. And their eyes? The witnesses struggled to describe it. They looked like predators who had already chosen their prey. Meanwhile, Mara Quinn's name became legend. The galaxy whispered it with equal parts hatred and awe. She had become the face of defiance, the woman who refused to kneel before the Council's power. To some, she was a terrorist. To others, she was justice incarnate. Every time the Dominion broadcast new propaganda, her image appeared in the background, standing in silence, eyes cold and unwavering. You wanted peace, her recorded voice said. But you wanted it paid for in blood that wasn't yours. So we gave you balance instead. In the Dominion capital, panic finally broke into full fear. Emergency sessions were held around the clock. Fleets were recalled, defenses raised, but nothing stopped the bleeding. They're not fighting, one admiral said, his voice shaking. They are dismantling us. By the time the Council realized the truth, it was too late. Humanity wasn't attacking at random. They were following a pattern. Every strike was part of something larger, a web of destruction designed to isolate, weaken, and collapse the Dominion from within. Supply, communication, leadership, and morale, all severed systematically. The Chancellor called an emergency meeting with every surviving Dominion leader. "You've unleashed chaos," he shouted. "You've turned them into monsters." The Dominion commander sneered through the holoscreen. "No," he said bitterly, "you did. You told them mercy was weakness." Then his transmission cut out. That night, the Council received a single message from the edge of known space. It was transmitted on every frequency, every language. There was no image, only a voice, human, quiet, unshaken. "You let killers walk free and called it peace. You let the innocent burn and called it balance. You told us to forgive while you looked away. But justice doesn't fade, it waits. And now, it has found you." After that, the message ended. Silence returned. And somewhere, far beyond the stars, the black fleets of humanity continued to move, slow, deliberate, unstoppable. They were no longer an army. They were an answer. The galaxy had asked for peace. Humanity had delivered it in the only language it understood, silence. And in that silence, every empire finally learned what it truly meant to fear the dark. The panic began quietly, like a storm forming far beyond the horizon. At first, the Council tried to ignore it. They held emergency meetings, issued statements, and convinced themselves that the reports of vanishing fleets were exaggerated. But the evidence kept growing, undeniable and terrifying. Dominion space was collapsing, its communications silent, its colonies gone dark. Every morning brought new reports of destroyed fleets, lost worlds, missing commanders. At first, the Council told itself that this was just a human rebellion, emotional, short-lived, bound to burn out. But this was not rebellion. This was extermination, carried out with precision, calculation, and purpose. Humanity wasn't fighting a war anymore. It was conducting a cleansing. And that realization shattered the illusion of power the Council had built over centuries. Inside the Grand Chamber of Seraph Prime, chaos ruled. The delegates shouted over each other, their voices echoing across the marble dome. "They are dismantling the Dominion," one delegate cried. "Entire sectors are gone." Another slammed a clawed hand on the table. "This isn't war, it's genocide." The Chancellor tried to speak but was drowned out by the noise. "We must intervene before they destabilize the galactic economy," shouted the Vaughn representative, but even his words carried a tremor of fear. "Intervene with what?" hissed the KOITH ambassador, his crystalline eyes flickering. "Our fleets are trapped in their own territories. The moment any ship enters human space, it vanishes. They're everywhere and nowhere." The chamber fell silent at that. The idea that humans could strike at will, without being seen or stopped, terrified even the most arrogant species. When the holoscreens flickered to life, everyone turned toward them. The Dominion's final distress call was playing. Static filled the air as a trembling voice spoke. "This is Admiral Vika of the Dominion fleet. If anyone receives this, do not, repeat, do not approach human territory. They're not fighting like us. They're not communicating. They see everything. We fire into the dark and hit nothing. And when we stop, they're already behind us. It's not war. It's punishment." Then the signal ended. No further transmissions followed. The Chancellor turned pale. We have to reach them. We must call for a ceasefire." The Vaughn delegate shook his head. "You can't negotiate with what you can't find." "We'll summon the human envoy," the Chancellor decided. "They must listen. They can't want endless destruction." But when they reached the Terran embassy, the building was empty. No guards. No staff. Only a single datapad left on the conference table. The Chancellor picked it up with trembling hands and activated it. A recorded message played in Mara Quinn's voice. "You told us to sit with murderers. You told us to forgive the slaughter of our children. You called it diplomacy. This is our answer. Humanity no longer attends your council. We no longer seek permission. We no longer ask for peace. We deliver it." The message ended. No further contact was made. The Council tried to reach Earth through back channels. Every transmission failed. Every satellite link was blocked. It was as if humanity had vanished completely, hidden behind an invisible curtain. They can't block the entire network, one technician muttered. But they could. They had. Humanity had shut itself off from the galaxy. No trade, no communication, no trace. And yet, somehow, their fleets still moved through alien space like ghosts. As the Council argued, the first human message appeared on the galactic net, broadcast to every major system. It wasn't long, but it froze every viewer in silence. The message began with a simple statement, spoken in Mara Quinn's calm voice. The Dominion demanded peace through blood. You demanded obedience through fear. We demanded justice through truth. None listened. So now, we don't speak. We act. The video shifted to show a Dominion capital world, seen from orbit. In the next instant, the planet's surface lit up in blinding fire. Then the signal cut to black. No sound, no screams, just silence. That silence was worse than any war. From that moment, the galaxy understood that humanity's campaign wasn't about power, it was about memory. They weren't conquering. They were teaching. Every Dominion world that had participated in the massacres was erased. Every warlord who had ordered civilian bombings was found and executed. But the strange part, the chilling part, was how selective the humans were. They didn't target innocents. They didn't strike neutral species. They didn't destroy cities at random. Every strike was exact, deliberate, planned. The galaxy realized with horror that the humans weren't raging. They were judging. Soon, the smaller empires began begging the Council for protection. You created this, the Nari ambassador screamed during one chaotic meeting. You let the Dominion murder them. Now you've unleashed something you can't stop. The Chancellor slammed his hand on the desk. Enough. But his voice was weak. His authority meant nothing anymore. No one looked to him for leadership. They all looked to the dark void outside, where the human fleets moved unseen. For the first time in its history, the Council deployed its own navy not to protect peace but to protect itself. Massive warships orbited Seraph Prime, scanning every shadow. The Chancellor reassured the public. The humans are limited in number, he said on a live broadcast. They cannot fight forever. But as the broadcast aired, one of the Council's own outposts vanished from sensors, an orbital defense hub less than 2 light-years away. No warning, no attack, just gone. The Council cut the transmission immediately. Behind closed doors, the truth was whispered. Humanity had surpassed every expectation. Their weapons used new technologies that the Council didn't even understand. Their cyber warfare could cripple systems light-years away. Their stealth fields were invisible even to hyperspace sensors. They didn't build for conquest. They built for deterrence. The problem was that deterrence had now become execution. The galaxy's predators had created something worse than themselves. Then, without warning, a new transmission came through, one that bypassed every encryption layer in the Council's communication web. The image flickered to life. It was Mara Quinn again, standing in a dimly lit command room. You thought your politics could save you, she said softly. You thought laws would protect you from the truth. You told us to kneel. Now we ask you, who will you kneel to when the lights go out? The transmission ended. That night, for the first time in centuries, the lights of Seraph Prime dimmed. Power grids flickered. Communications faltered. Civilian traffic shut down. Panic spread through the city as people looked up at the stars and saw faint shapes moving in the sky. Massive silhouettes, black against the starlight. No one fired. No one dared. The shapes lingered for hours before disappearing into the void. No shots were fired. But the message was clear. Humanity was watching. After that night, the Council no longer held sessions in the open. Their meetings took place underground, away from the sky, as if hiding from the gaze of something far greater. The Chancellor's speeches grew shorter, his voice weaker, until one day, he simply stopped appearing altogether. The Council began fracturing, each species withdrawing to its own territory, desperate to avoid the humans' wrath. But it didn't matter. The galaxy could hide, but it could not forget. Because now, every star, Every world, every empire knew the truth. The humans didn't want peace. They wanted justice. And justice, once awakened, never sleeps. The galaxy had seen war before, but never like this. Empires had clashed, fleets had burned, planets had fallen. But those wars were loud, chaotic, predictable. This was different. Humanity's war had no speeches, no declarations, no celebration. It was a cold, methodical dismantling of everything that had betrayed them. The Dominion's leaders were vanishing one by one. Their fleets were nothing but scattered debris floating in silent darkness. Every stronghold that had once flown their flag now stood empty, reclaimed by the void. The Council's intelligence networks were collapsing too, because every agent they sent near human space simply disappeared. The galaxy's greatest powers, which had ruled through fear for centuries, were now paralyzed by a new kind of fear. One that didn't shout, one that didn't warn, one that hunted quietly until it was too late. On Sereth Prime, the Council met again, though there was nothing left to say. Their empire of bureaucracy and arrogance had begun to rot from the inside. The Chancellor's face was pale, his voice trembling as he addressed the remaining delegates. We must restore order. Humanity's actions threaten the balance of all civilization. The Vaughn delegate laughed bitterly. Balance? He spat. You call this balance? You let murderers destroy their colonies, and when those same killers burn, you call it imbalance. The room erupted again. The Council had turned on itself, clawing for excuses to avoid admitting the truth. They had lost control of the galaxy. The Chancellor slammed his hand on the table. If we allow this to continue, they will not stop with the Dominion. And who will stop them? The KOITH hissed. You? Me? They're already here. The Chancellor froze. What do you mean, here? The KRYTH turned his gaze toward the massive windows overlooking Sereth Prime's skyline. Look outside. They all turned. The skies above the capital glowed faintly red. Hundreds of faint dots moved silently in formation, far above the planet's orbit, too organized, too synchronized to be asteroids. A council guard whispered, ships, but his voice faded as the realization spread. They weren't Dominion ships. They bore no markings. They didn't broadcast identification codes. They were silent, like ghosts. Activate planetary defenses, the Chancellor ordered. But the command never completed. The lights in the chamber flickered, then died. Across the city, the power grids went offline. Communication networks froze. Within minutes, Sereth Prime was blind. Panic erupted as every system went dark. Then, through the silent blackness, a single message appeared across every holoscreen. A voice. Human. Calm. Controlled. You called us savages. You called us unstable. You told us to forgive while our children burned. Now you will learn what forgiveness costs. The signal ended, and the screens went black again. Far above the planet, humanity's fleet held position. Admiral Rowan stood aboard the HSS Nemesis, her expression unreadable as she watched the planet below. They'll think we're here to attack, her first officer said quietly. We're not, Rowan replied. They need to see what we could do, not what we will. Her gaze remained fixed on the burning horizon. Transmit the coordinates to all units. Let them look up and understand. On her command, the entire fleet decloaked for precisely 10 minutes. The sky above Sereth Prime filled with black silhouettes, thousands of Terran warships stretching from one horizon to the other, blotting out the stars. Citizens screamed, some dropped to their knees, some simply stared in silence. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the fleet vanished. No attack, no word, just silence. That was humanity's apex response, not conquest, not destruction, but dominance through fear and control. It was a message carved into the stars. We are watching. We are capable. We are done forgiving. Across the galaxy, the effect was immediate. The Dominion's allies surrendered before they were even contacted. Minor empires that had once mocked humanity began sending messages of apology, treaties, and tributes. Some begged for protection. Others simply declared neutrality, terrified of being noticed. The Council received over 1,000 petitions from frightened worlds asking for guidance, but the Chancellor had none to give. He had not heard from his own fleets in days. "They could destroy us anytime," whispered one advisor. "Why haven't they?" The Chancellor stared at the silent stars outside. "Because they're teaching us something," he said. "They're teaching us fear." Meanwhile, back on Earth, the mood was not triumphant, it was grave. The leaders of the Terran Republic gathered in the subterranean command complex beneath Geneva. "The Dominion is finished," Admiral Rowan reported. "The Council has withdrawn all patrols. No coordinated resistance remains." The President of Earth, a weary woman named Clara Hayes, nodded slowly. "And the casualties?" "Minimal on our side. None civilian. We kept the strikes clean." "Good," Hayes said softly. "That's enough. End it." Rowan looked at her in surprise. "End it? Madam President, they would have erased us from the galaxy. We can't just end it," Hayes repeated, voice calm but sharp. "We've made our point. If we keep pushing, we become what they called us." There was a long silence. Finally, Rowan nodded. "Understood. Ending operations. The fleets will withdraw to Sol space." For the next several weeks, humanity went silent again, not in defeat, but in choice. The fleets that had brought the galaxy to its knees simply vanished into the void. One by one, the dark signatures disappeared from foreign skies. When the Council's reconnaissance ships returned to check the wreckage of Dominion worlds, they found them completely abandoned. No human occupation, no control flags, no territorial claims. Only silence. And on each of those worlds, a message carved into the ruined surfaces. No mercy. No conquest. Only justice. The Chancellor tried to rally what remained of the Council, but it was useless. The galaxy no longer listened. Trade routes shifted toward Earth. Diplomatic envoys begged to open talks. Humanity had become the unspoken authority, unofficial, unwanted, undeniable. Every empire that had once laughed at them now reshaped its policies to align with Terran interests. Even the Vaughn and Kryth, once the loudest voices of disdain, sent emissaries under white flags, offering reparations and resources. But no one from Earth answered their messages. Humanity didn't demand tribute, didn't seize control, didn't gloat. They simply ignored everyone. And that, more than anything, terrified the galaxy. Because conquest could be fought. Indifference could not. Deep in the ruins of a Dominion capital world, a small Council survey team discovered a strange monument left behind after the Terran strikes. It wasn't made of metal or stone, it was made of scorched glass, fused into shape by the heat of orbital bombardment. At its base, a single phrase was engraved in dozens of languages. "We warned you. You laughed. Now, you understand." Back on Earth, Admiral Rowan stood once more on the balcony of her command tower, watching the stars glitter above the horizon. "Do you think they'll come for revenge?" her aide asked quietly. Rowan shook her head. "No. They'll never risk it again. They'll build walls, hide behind treaties, tell themselves they're safe. But they'll never forget." She turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the faint blue glow of the Earth's atmosphere. "That's enough. Humanity doesn't need to rule the galaxy. It just needs the galaxy to remember why it shouldn't touch us." And as the night stretched across the Earth, the stars above shimmered faintly. Some said they could still see faint shadows moving between them, black shapes that never fully disappeared. The Council called them myths. The Dominion's survivors called them nightmares. Humanity called them guardians. The apex predator had returned to the dark, but it hadn't gone to sleep. It was simply watching, waiting, ensuring that no one ever mistook silence for weakness again. The galaxy was different now. The chaos had slowed, but the fear hadn't faded. Every empire was waiting for the humans to speak again, to demand something, to declare their rule over the ashes they had left behind. But no words came. Earth remained silent, calm, unreachable. The Council continued meeting in panic, their every discussion poisoned with guilt and dread. They had no more authority, no fleets, no unity. Delegates who had once mocked humanity now refused to even mention Earth's name aloud. The once golden banners of the Council now hung like reminders of arrogance. Their power was gone, and the silence of the humans was more terrifying than any declaration of war. Because silence meant choice. Silence meant patience. And patience was the weapon humanity had always mastered. Weeks passed before the Council received a message. Not from a diplomat, not from a soldier, from an automated beacon that appeared suddenly in orbit around Seraph Prime. The Council's defense grid scanned it nervously, afraid to destroy it, afraid to leave it untouched. When they finally decrypted its signal, a message appeared on every public channel. It was simple, quiet, and absolute. The Council is summoned. No signature, no location, just coordinates, a point deep within uncharted space. The Chancellor tried to ignore it, but fear spread faster than reason. "What if it's a trap?" asked the KOITH representative, voice trembling. "Everything they do is a trap," replied the Vaughn. "But if we don't go," he didn't finish the sentence. Every being in that room knew what would happen if they refused. And so, against every instinct, the Council obeyed. They assembled a fleet, not of warships, but of transports, carrying the remaining delegates of what used to be galactic law. The voyage took 4 days. 4 days of silence, of fear, of whispered prayers that humanity's wrath had cooled. When the fleet reached the coordinates, what they saw froze their blood. Suspended in the black was a massive structure unlike anything they had ever seen. It wasn't built from stone or metal. It looked grown, forged from light and shadow, a colossal ring floating in the void, large enough to swallow a moon. Around it, hundreds of Terran warships hung motionless, their hulls black as glass, their lights faint and blood-red. The Council's ships approached slowly, broadcasting endless messages of peace. "We come to speak," the Chancellor said. "We come in peace." No answer. Not until they entered the shadow of the ring. Then, a single human voice filled their comm channels. "Calm. Cold. Dock and stand by. You will be heard." Inside the ring, the Council delegates were escorted through vast metallic corridors by human soldiers. The soldiers wore black armor with no insignia, no names, no emotion. Their faces were hidden behind mirrored visors that reflected the terrified aliens walking before them. The delegation was led into a massive chamber, round, empty, illuminated by a soft blue glow from the floor. In the center stood a single table. Around it, human officers waited. And at the head of the table sat Ambassador Mara Quinn. For a long time, no one spoke. The aliens could hear their own heartbeats, their own breathing echoing in the cold air. Finally, the Chancellor stepped forward. "Ambassador Quinn," he began, voice shaking. We are here to discuss terms. To rebuild trust. Mara interrupted softly, her voice calm but cutting. "Tell me, Chancellor, did you trust us when our colonies burned? When your Council voted to ignore our pleas?" He faltered. We believed, you believed nothing," she said. "You watched. You measured the value of our lives in trade routes and mining rights." Her gaze hardened. "You let murderers walk free. And now you come to talk about peace." The Chancellor swallowed hard. "What do you want from us?" he whispered. Mara stood slowly, her shadow stretching across the room. "Nothing," she said. "You have nothing we want. We didn't call you here to negotiate. We called you here to witness." Before anyone could respond, the chamber darkened. The walls around them shimmered, turning into vast holographic windows. Outside, the delegates saw the stars, and then the projections changed. Images appeared, real footage, gathered from across Dominion space. Worlds in ruin. Fleets drifting in silence. Broadcasts of Dominion generals laughing as human colonies burned. Then, the aftermath. Human fleets descending from the void, precise and unstoppable, erasing entire armadas in seconds. The aliens watched in horror as history unfolded before their eyes. Every strike, every act of vengeance, every life taken was laid bare before them. "This," Mara said quietly, "is what you called justice delayed. This is what you allowed." Every world that screamed for help while you debated trade agreements is gone. And every empire that profited from our suffering has paid the same price. She turned to face them fully now, her voice rising, not in anger but in strength. Humanity doesn't rule this galaxy. It doesn't want to. But understand this, our silence is not surrender. Our mercy is not weakness. And our restraint is not endless. The Vaughn delegate stepped forward, trembling. If you destroy the council, chaos will follow. Billions will suffer. You can't do this. Mara looked at him for a long moment. We don't need to destroy you, she said. You already destroyed yourselves the moment you chose fear over decency. Then she pressed a button on the table, and the holograms changed again. The delegates gasped. On the screens, they saw their own homeworlds, every council world, every major empire capital, being watched. Thousands of Terran ships hovered quietly above them, uncloaking one by one, visible for the first time. We could end it here, Mara said softly. But that would make us like you. And humanity doesn't become what it despises. The room fell silent. No one dared to move. Mara walked around the table, her boots echoing on the metal floor. You wanted to bargain with murderers, she said. You wanted mercy for those who showed none. So now, you'll live with what you've made. The council will not be destroyed, but it will no longer rule. You will disband. You will surrender your fleets. You will leave the stars that aren't yours. Humanity will not govern the galaxy, but it will watch it closely. The Chancellor tried to protest, but Mara raised a hand, and he stopped instantly. You're not being punished, she said. You're being given a second chance. Use it well. Because if you don't, she looked up at the holograms, at the vast fleets floating above alien worlds like silent gods. Next time, we won't come to talk. When the meeting ended, the delegates were escorted back to their ships. None spoke. None dared. As their fleet departed the ring, the Terran ships moved aside silently, allowing them to pass. No threats. No words. Just those endless, cold eyes watching from the dark. When they returned to Seraph Prime, the council disbanded within a week. No one wanted to lead. No one wanted responsibility. Empires retreated to their own corners of the galaxy, afraid to move too far, afraid to draw attention. Trade slowed. Armies shrank. And above it all, in every night sky, a faint glimmer could be seen. Black ships, drifting just beyond sight. Humanity's shadow had become the galaxy's conscience. And aboard the Nemesis, Mara Quinn watched the stars from her private cabin. It's done, Admiral Rowan said over the comm. The council is finished. Mara nodded slowly. No, she said quietly. It's begun. The galaxy finally understands the cost of pretending peace exists where justice doesn't. She looked out at the void beyond the viewport, at the stars glimmering softly. They wanted us to bargain with killers, she whispered. Now they know what happens when we refuse. Outside, the Terran fleets began to disperse, vanishing once more into the darkness between worlds. The war was over, but the silence remained. And in that silence, every empire remembered the lesson carved into history, that humanity doesn't beg, doesn't bow, and doesn't bargain. It endures. It watches. It waits. And when the galaxy forgets again, it will rise once more from the shadows, calm and merciless, to remind them what true reckoning means. When the last Dominion world went dark and the council fell apart, the galaxy became quiet again, but it was not peace. It was fear wrapped in silence. The trade routes that once glowed with color and life now drifted empty, as if even light itself hesitated to travel too far from human space. No one dared to patrol near Sol anymore. No one crossed the borders that had no visible lines but were marked by unspoken terror. Entire civilizations had learned that humanity's patience was finite, and their justice absolute. The stars themselves seemed to shine differently, brighter, but colder, because everyone knew who now watched them from the dark. On Earth, there were no parades, no victory speeches, no songs of triumph. The world had seen enough death to understand that real victory came not in glory, but in survival. The skies above the planet were filled with quiet silhouettes of ships returning from the void, black hulls reflecting the sunlight as they entered the atmosphere one by one. Families stood on the ground watching, tears in their eyes. They didn't cheer, they simply breathed again. Humanity had defended itself not just with weapons, but with memory. The cost had been high, but the silence that followed felt heavier than any celebration could ever justify. In the command chamber of the Terran High Fleet, Admiral Rowan stood before a massive window overlooking Earth's curvature. The stars above glimmered faintly, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the weight lift off her shoulders. "Operation completed," said her aide softly. "The fleets are home." Rowan nodded slowly, but her expression didn't change. "And the council?" she asked. "Gone," came the reply. "They disbanded. Every empire is retreating inward. No one dares to rebuild what they destroyed." Rowan closed her eyes. "Good. Let them live with what they made." Across the galaxy, the aftermath unfolded quietly. The Vaughn Empire sealed its borders, their leaders haunted by whispers of Terran fleets still watching from the edge of their systems. The KRYTH retreated to their crystalline worlds, dismantling their war industries in silence. Even the merchant guilds who had once profited from the blood of weaker worlds now sent shipments of aid to human colonies, hoping to buy forgiveness that would never come. Humanity, however, never asked for anything. They didn't claim land, didn't demand tribute. They simply rebuilt, slowly, silently, methodically. Cities on Mars and Europa flourished again. Refugee colonies thrived, and for the first time in centuries, no child went to bed under the sound of alarms. But even as humanity rebuilt, its fleets never truly stood down. The Black Armada remained stationed in the outer systems, unseen, unspoken, but always there. They were the shadows between the stars, the quiet guardians of a peace bought with vengeance. Commanders called it deterrence. Soldiers called it duty. But among the civilians, it became something else entirely: legend. They called it the Silent Watch. Parents told their children that when they looked up at the night sky and saw the faint streaks of light moving across the dark, those were not meteors. They were the Watchers, ensuring that no one would ever harm Earth again. Mara Quinn became a name that history would never forget. Some called her a hero, others a monster. The truth was that she had been neither. She was the consequence. When she stood before the assembly of Earth for the final time, the chamber was silent as she spoke. "We didn't fight for power," she said. "We fought to remind the galaxy that peace isn't given by the strong, it's earned by the just. The Council wanted peace without cost. We gave them the bill." Her eyes softened as she looked around. "The galaxy will call us predators. Let them. Better a predator that guards its young than a saint that watches them die." The room remained silent, but every person there understood. Her words were not pride, they were truth. Years passed. The scars of the war faded, but the lessons did not. The Council never reformed. No new galactic authority rose to take its place. Every species ruled itself cautiously, always aware of the quiet presence watching from the edges of deep space. Humanity became something else entirely, not an empire, not a conqueror, but a warning written into the very structure of the stars. Every academy, every government, every fleet across the galaxy studied what the humans had done, and they all reached the same conclusion: never provoke Earth. On a quiet night in the Sol system, Admiral Rowan visited the memorial built for the fallen of Halcyon III, the first colony that had burned. It was a simple monument, a circle of black stone carved with names. She stood there for a long time, her reflection faint in the polished surface. "They think we're gods now," she whispered. "They think we don't bleed." She placed her hand on the cold stone. "But we remember." Above her, a faint trail of light crossed the sky, one of the last patrol ships returning home. It glowed softly before disappearing into the horizon. Far beyond the solar system, in the shadow of the galactic rim, a lone Terran outpost received a transmission. It was encrypted, old, marked with Mara Quinn's personal code. The message was short: "If the galaxy forgets, remind them." The officer on duty read it twice, then smiled faintly. Humanity's work was never over. The galaxy was vast, and memory was fragile. But the Watchers in the dark would always be there, patient and silent. Back on Earth, as the sun rose over the oceans and the cities came alive again, children played beneath the morning light without fear of sirens or war. The world had survived, scarred but stronger. And in that peace, one truth had been carved forever into the soul of every human being: that mercy, once betrayed, becomes something far more powerful than fear. It becomes the silence that follows, the silence that warns, protects, and remembers. And so, the galaxy moved forward beneath that silence, cautious and humbled, always aware that somewhere, far beyond their stars, humanity still watched. The apex predators had returned to the dark, not to destroy, but to ensure that no one ever again mistook kindness for weakness. The council was gone, the empires scattered, and only one name remained whispered in every corner of the cosmos: humanity. The race that refused to kneel, refused to forgive murderers, and refused to die. The race that turned silence into power. The race that, when provoked, taught the stars themselves what it meant to face reckoning.